Federal judges are pushing back against the Trump regime's illegal orders. And we're also talking about Trump appointed judges. We're talking about Reagan appointed judges, George W. Bush appointed judges. Yes, Obama, Biden, and Clinton appointed judges. But a lot of judges are basically saying, look, you pushed this too far. And even the Trump appointed judges, when it comes to the disappearing of human being migrants without habeas corpus and without due process, these Trump appointed judges are saying that's not what the Supreme Court said, Donald Trump. Even though the Supreme Court didn't go as far in terms of immigrant rights as people would have liked, they still said there has to be a habeas petition and due process. And so we're seeing a lot of federal judges assert their authority in ways that we haven't seen, say, of the MAGA Republicans in the House of Representatives and the Senate, to almost preemptively address the issue that a lot of people were concerned about, which is that, these migrants don't exactly have on a Rolodex the name of constitutional like lawyers. So who's going to write the habeas petition? So what you're seeing, I think, is some of these federal judges, like a Trump appointed judge in Texas, basically saying preemptively, if you're going to do this, you gotta show me the paper, show me the evidence, show me the money, show me what's happening here before you start disappearing people to El Salvador. And we're seeing that in district courts across the country now, using the Supreme Court ruling relating to the Boasberg case in Washington, D.C., where he did the injunction against Trump under the Alien Enemies Act. The Supreme Court on venue ground basically reversed him, but then had that line about you still have to provide due process, which now the federal judiciary is almost totally in line with, provided there is venue and the right jurisdiction. File the habeas here before you disappear people. So we're seeing that. We're seeing judges of all political parties stand up to Trump when he's trying to pardon, these January 6ers for unrelated crimes to January 6th. We saw the Supreme Court. You and I did another take on this. 9-0 ruling against Donald Trump on the Abrego Garcia case. Unanimous ruling. When you get Clarence Thomas and Justice Sotomayor agree on something, that sends a strong message. And they said, no, of course, federal courts have jurisdiction, even if you disappear someone to El Salvador. There is no executive branch oopsies clause. Facilitate the return of this individual and treat him with the process that you would have had there been a habeas process and due process, in the outset. So it does seem as Donald Trump's authoritarian machinations and manifestations grow, the federal judiciary sees, even if it's out of self-interest and threat, which, by the way, our framers were fine with. That's why they pitted the branches of government against each other, saying, yo, this is my turf. Even though I'm a Republican or even though I'm whatever, no, I'm not okay with this. Interesting, Harry. What do you make of, I guess, the resistance in the federal judiciary?
Yeah, it's a really excellent point, Ben. Look, judges exist within a culture of the federal judiciary. Among other things, they're very worried about being reversed. So this is one aspect in which the unanimity of the Supreme Court decision is huge. As you say, from Thomas to Jackson. And of course, there's a fault line there. Sotomayor and the other two came out expressing the horror and outrage, and the actual per curiam is much more sort of sterile, but doesn't matter. 9-0, the signal has been given. And it started with Boasberg. Even though they, pulled off the rug from under him a little, he hung heavy and in I think a way that other judges noticed. And just as you say, I think judges are more and more understanding and being emboldened to understand their role as providing pushback here. So you just made a really good point about a pardon case. It's a case where the administration kind of rigged it so it's the easiest thing in the world. It's the hardest thing in the world to push back. It's the same motion that happened in the Eric Adams case. Remember how hard it is to fight the administration. But the judge is holding their feet to the fire and saying, well, I want some papers on this and you're not telling me anything. Come back after you've done the papers. You yourself, and we talked in the other YouTube about Judge Zinnes, and I just feel that it has really, seeped into the water that federal judges drink, that this is their important role to play in this moment in history. The DC district bench, I've talked about them from the start because they're the very bench, all of them heard these cases involving the January 6th marauders, and all their work was wiped out in a stroke in Trump's first day in office. Trevor McFadden, Trump appointee, but he was at the Department of Justice before it's been totally corrupted, and and he's part of that court now, which I think really has solidarity for understanding the lawlessness of the president and the need to sort of push back. So this is subtle stuff. And you're right that it sounds in different kinds of cases that don't directly control, but the general notion of, hey, federal courts, you're supposed to push back here. You're not just supposed to swallow anything they say or don't say because they make it hard for you to ferret out. We're watching Boasberg push back on them. We're watching Zinnes do it. And we're watching other judges, as you say, Republican and Democrat, some 80 injunctions entered, very many of them by Republican judges, a fair number of them by Trump judges. So I do think that there's been a wake-up call, and it's in part come from on high, that judges have said, yeah, I guess I got a job to do here, and if I'm not going to do it, no one's going to do it. And you know what? So far, they're doing it commendably.
This sets up the showdown. We did a whole other take on what that's going to, look like. You and I really, I'm not trying to pat ourselves on the back, but going back to,
we had this. I'm sorry. We had this. Yeah.
we were saying that the showdown would really start right around kind of May. So it's a little bit earlier than I think even, we expected, but the real question, and you and I did the take when it was, Justice Roberts, this is where we did it. Justice Roberts' end of the year report, where he warned about the 4 things that he said worried him and troubled him. And they were all basically Trump, 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 Trump. And it was like, yeah, but you gave this guy absolute immunity. So you're to blame. Like, come on, Roberts, like you're saying you're worried about these things, but these were the exact issues that Kagan and Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson were flagging in the absolute immunity oral argument. And you said, don't worry about that. I'm more worried that we could be chilling actions of an executive branch if they don't get absolute immunity. So what are you doing, Roberts? But now it's here. Right?
It is here. Although as you say, I really do want to be clear, because the fate of the republic does seem often to ride on John Roberts and John Roberts alone. If there are 5 to sustain him in some terrible authoritarian expansion of power, Roberts will be that 5th vote. So it's a terrifying prospect, especially because I have my opinion about Roberts is he's sort of one of 2 different judges, depending on the kind of case. All that's true. The 5 in the Supreme Court, 6 actually, Comey Barrett was also in the procurator, just, said it very flat, didn't have the passion that Sotomayor had. In other words, things could turn back. But where we are now, and especially as, issues have played out with the Abrego Garcia case, which involves the ultimate nightmare for a civilized society of just taking an innocent man and, putting him in a hellhole to die. That's just, there's no judge that has that in their name that can simply ignore it. So the footing for our first big constitutional showdown, I think, is really favorable for the judges. And I think this overall cultural factor of emboldening others is there. I don't want to say, I've been fooled and dismayed too many times to say it with confidence, but this is such an important stretch where the Trump administration really was flexing, and the judges have really responded. And what's left is potentially just flat out disobedience and a full on constitutional crisis. But given their really excessive exertions of power, federal court pushback here. Oh, and given, Congress and the Senate and everything are just completely indolent, and given the media, given how he's made, thank God for the federal courts and what they're doing. So far it could change, but man, oh man, they've come through.
Well, this is probably the wrong fight for Trump to pick.
That's true too.
Right. I mean, it's
so true politically.
It's the most flagrant abuse. I mean, you're kidnapping humans. You're not providing any evidence that they engaged in crimes. You're saying, trust me, bro. And you're moving them not to ICE detention centers in the United States or even Guantanamo Bay, which would be terrible. And there were serious issues even when Taliban and terrorists were moved to Guantanamo Bay post 9/11. You're putting them in a concentration camp or a terrorism, whatever you call it, in El Salvador, which is viewed as one of the hubs of the biggest human rights abuses in the world right now. So you can't really have a clearer set of facts. Some of the other issues where the Trump regime is able to chip away, but Trump has no patience to just chip away, is you take it from the angle of the attack on the administrative stuff, and you go, oh, is this independent agency there? Should the injunction be post or pre-termination? And you get into the weeds of it, and then you slowly chip away, erode the foundation, and then layer in your authoritarianism when you have your proxies running the agencies. Trump's doing that, but he had no patience for that. So then he went right for the nuclear bomb on the Constitution first in the order of operations. And that's always kind of Trump's thing too. And that to me, and I'm not like, this is where I'm not trying to be like, great work, federal courts, because they've screwed up so many inalienable rights but it's become such an issue that they're like, almost like, this is what you're handing. Really, I'm not, no, screw you. And that's kind of what we're dealing with. Harry, the Talking Feds YouTube, the Talking Feds Substack, the Talking Feds podcast, where I get my news and info from. Everybody should subscribe to all of those as well. Harry, thanks as always.
Thank you, Ben.
Hit subscribe, 5 million.
Meidas? Check out the Meidas Plus Substack for ad-free articles, reports, podcasts, daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, and more. Sign up for free now at MeidasPlus.com.